She arrived at the airport early, as she always did. Even after years of running her own company, she never liked rushing. There was something about the quiet moments before a flight, when the world felt paused, that she found calming. Today, however, the calm would not last. She moved with confidence through the terminal, her suitcase rolling smoothly behind her, her business attire crisp and professional. People glanced her way as she passed, some nodding politely, some curious, but she paid them no mind. She had a flight to catch, and her mind was already on the meetings ahead. As she approached the first-class boarding gate, she expected the usual smooth process. She had her ticket, her ID, and a long history with the airline as a loyal customer. She was used to flying first class not for luxury but for convenience, space to work, quiet to think, and the chance to be ready for her day without exhaustion. She handed her ticket to the agent, smiling politely. The smile quickly faltered. The agent looked at her ticket, then back at her, and hesitated. There was a flicker in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," he said, but his voice lacked confidence. You can't board first class." For a moment she froze. The words didn't make sense. She handed her ticket back and asked again calmly, "I'm sorry, I don't understand. I have a confirmed seat in first class. Can you explain?" The agent shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at the computer screen, then at her, then away again. "There's a problem. I'm not sure what the issue is." Her mind worked quickly. She had faced difficult situations before, but this felt different. It wasn't a misunderstanding about a ticket. Something about the way he avoided eye contact, the hesitation in his tone, suggested there was another reason. She kept her voice steady. "Can you call a supervisor?" she asked, maintaining her calm tone. The agent nodded but looked uneasy. A few moments later, a supervisor arrived, and the tension in the air became noticeable. Other passengers started looking, whispering quietly to each other. It was unusual to see someone being stopped at the gate without a clear reason. The supervisor, a man in his 40s with a pressed uniform, spoke in a rehearsed, almost nervous tone. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's some issue with your boarding." "What issue?" she asked, keeping her voice firm but polite. "I have a confirmed first-class ticket and I've never had a problem before." He hesitated, and she could feel the uncertainty from him. There was no clear explanation. It was obvious he was uncomfortable, and she realized that whatever was happening, it wasn't based on policy. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood tall, observing everything. Names, times, statements, she noted them in her mind. She understood the importance of keeping control over the situation, documenting it for later if necessary. Other passengers began watching more closely now. Some looked sympathetic, some confused. She noticed a few shaking their heads at the unfairness, but she stayed focused. She knew this wasn't just about a seat. She had learned long ago that sometimes small injustices were signs of bigger problems, and how one reacted in such moments could make a difference. Finally, the supervisor admitted reluctantly that he didn't have a proper reason to deny her boarding. He seemed to search for something, anything that could justify the action, but there was nothing. She could see it in his eyes. He knew he was caught between rules and an unspoken bias. She smiled slightly, not mockingly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew what she could do next. She didn't get angry, though a sharp sting of frustration ran through her. Instead, she asked, "Can you confirm this is the only way to resolve this, or is there someone I can speak to at headquarters?" That question changed the room. The agent and supervisor exchanged uneasy glances. Other passengers leaned in, curious now, sensing that something important was unfolding. She had already begun to shift the balance of power, simply by staying calm and demanding accountability. A few moments later, she stepped aside to make a private call. Airports were noisy, but she didn't need complete silence. She had her phone, a direct line to the corporate office of the airline. She explained the situation clearly without exaggeration. She described the denial of boarding, the lack of explanation, and how this could appear as discrimination or negligence. She cited her history with the airline, her loyalty, and the inconvenience caused not just to her, but to the perception of the company if this became public. The person on the other end of the line initially sounded dismissive, assuming she was just another frustrated passenger. But as she spoke, her calm and deliberate tone, her professionalism, and the subtle reminder of her influence and networks shifted the conversation. She was not a person to be brushed off. She made it clear that she expected a serious response, not just an apology. Meanwhile, the passengers nearby were watching, intrigued. Some whispered quietly, others pretended not to listen. But the energy in the area had changed. The air felt charged, as if everyone knew this was no ordinary confrontation. She stayed on the call for several minutes, making her points clearly. She did not threaten. She did not yell. She spoke with authority, using logic and fairness as her tools. It was impressive to watch, and the supervisor still at the gate could not hide his discomfort. He realized that this situation was beyond his control, and he was powerless in the face of someone who had both influence and patience. By the time she ended the call, she knew she had made an impact. The airline had taken notice. The staff at the gate seemed unsure how to proceed, and passengers were beginning to murmur in support. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not because she had won, but because she had stayed true to herself, faced the injustice calmly, and taken the first steps toward accountability. As she packed her phone away and waited, she reflected on how often people give up in moments like these. She thought about how easy it is to feel powerless in a system, to accept unfair treatment quietly, but she knew better. She had learned that standing firm, documenting everything, and using the proper channels could turn a frustrating situation into a moment of change. Other passengers started to approach her, quietly expressing support. Some thanked her for speaking up. One person whispered, "It shouldn't happen like this." She nodded politely, appreciating their kindness, but kept her focus on what needed to happen next. She wasn't there to collect praise. She was there to ensure fairness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the airline staff returned with a new plan. She would eventually be allowed to board, but that was not enough for her. She wanted acknowledgement, accountability, and systemic change. She wanted the airline to understand that such incidents could not continue unnoticed. As she walked toward the boarding gate once more, she held her head high. Her steps were calm, but every movement radiated confidence. She had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a demonstration of poise, professionalism, and quiet power. People continued to watch, some in admiration, some in silent agreement with her stance. She boarded the plane eventually, but not without a sense of mission. This was just the beginning. The denial of boarding was more than a personal inconvenience. It was a reminder that fairness and respect had to be defended, even in the smallest moments. And she was ready to make sure it was addressed fully and properly, using all the tools at her disposal. As she settled into her seat, she felt a mix of relief and determination. Relief that the immediate conflict was over, and determination that the larger issue would be handled correctly. She opened her laptop, began reviewing her notes from the meetings ahead, and thought about her next steps. This was not just a story about a seat on a plane. It was a story about standing up, about using influence responsibly, and about showing the world that fairness cannot be ignored. Passengers around her resumed their routines, some still glancing her way, some whispering quietly about the earlier incident. But she remained focused, a quiet force in motion. She had already begun to turn frustration into strategy, and she knew that the real work was only beginning. The airline would feel the impact, and not in a way that could be brushed off or forgotten. The moment at the gate had been tense, but she had handled it perfectly, not with anger, not with aggression, but with calm intelligence and unwavering self-respect. And as the plane took off, she looked out the window, ready to move forward, knowing that she had already planted the seeds of change that would soon grow. After finally boarding the plane, she could have let the situation slide. She could have settled into her seat, closed her laptop, and tried to forget the embarrassment of being denied boarding just minutes ago. But that wasn't who she was. She believed in addressing problems directly, in holding people accountable, and in making sure that unfair treatment didn't just disappear into silence. She wasn't angry, at least not in the way that clouded judgment. Instead, she felt a clear, focused determination. As the plane taxied down the runway, she reviewed the events in her mind. She remembered the hesitation in the gate agent's voice, the nervous glance of the supervisor, and the quiet whispers of other passengers. Every small detail mattered. She had already documented them mentally, but she also made notes in her phone, recording times, names, and statements. She understood the power of documentation. In her experience, it was often the difference between a complaint being ignored and a serious investigation taking place. She glanced around at the other first-class passengers. Some were absorbed in their devices, some were reading, and a few were chatting quietly. No one seemed to have noticed the tension that had unfolded at the gate, yet she could feel that subtle awareness in the air, like a shadow that lingered even after the event had passed. She didn't seek attention, but she couldn't ignore the fact that other people had witnessed the unfair treatment. There was a lesson here, one that extended far beyond her own experience. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the airline's corporate office. She opened it carefully. They acknowledged receiving her call and promised that someone would contact her to resolve the matter. She read the message slowly, appreciating the formality but knowing that words alone were not enough. Action mattered more than apologies. She replied, thanking them for the acknowledgement and emphasizing that she expected a full review of the situation. As the flight climbed higher, she leaned back in her seat and allowed herself a moment to think strategically. She wasn't just reacting emotionally. She was planning the next steps. She considered how she could use this incident as an opportunity, not to punish anyone personally, but to ensure the airline recognized the seriousness of what had happened. She wanted policies reviewed, staff trained, and accountability established. This wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. Around her, the hum of the plane filled the cabin. Flight attendants moved quietly down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks, smiling politely but without drawing attention. She noticed them because she paid attention to details, but she didn't interact unless necessary. She focused instead on preparing for the meetings ahead. She had presentations to finalize, contracts to review, and emails to send. But all the while, her mind remained partially on the incident, weighing possibilities and outcomes. During the flight, she thought about how often people in her position faced similar situations. High-profile individuals, leaders, and executives frequently encountered resistance or subtle discrimination, even when they had the means to demand fair treatment. She had experienced her share of minor incidents before, but this one had been blatant. She knew that if she didn't address it, nothing would change. Silence would allow the behavior to continue, affecting others who might not have the same resources or confidence to speak up. She considered the wider implications. Airlines were businesses, yes, but they were also responsible for customer trust. Denying a passenger boarding without a clear reason, especially someone who clearly had the right to board, reflected poorly on policies and training. She thought about the long-term consequences for the company's reputation and realized that this incident, small as it might seem to some, could become a turning point if handled correctly. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a senior representative of the airline. She answered, greeting them politely but firmly. She recounted the incident once more, describing the gate agent's hesitation, the supervisor's uncertainty, and the lack of a valid reason for denying her boarding. She spoke calmly, without raising her voice but with clear authority. She emphasized that she expected a complete review of the situation, including staff training and procedural adjustments, to ensure that no other passenger faced similar treatment. The representative on the other end listened carefully, sometimes interjecting to ask clarifying questions. She provided precise answers, offering details without exaggeration. She stayed composed, but she made it clear that she understood her rights as a customer and the influence she had. She reminded them subtly that this was not just a personal grievance. It could have public implications if mishandled. After the call ended, she reflected on the conversation. The airline representative had been professional, but it was evident they had not fully anticipated the seriousness of the situation. She knew that follow-up would be necessary. This was not a moment to relax, but a moment to stay vigilant. She reviewed her notes again, making sure she had every detail correctly documented, ready for the next stage. She looked out the window as clouds passed by below, thinking about how small moments could reveal much larger truths. A denied boarding, a hesitant employee, a supervisor unsure how to respond. These were not isolated incidents. They reflected systemic issues that needed attention. She felt a sense of responsibility, not only for herself but for everyone who might face similar situations in the future. She had the means to create change, and she intended to use it wisely. The flight attendants came by with drinks. She politely declined, preferring to remain alert and focused. She didn't want distractions. She reviewed her itinerary, mentally preparing for the meetings ahead, but also planning how she would handle the airline's follow-up. She considered contacting higher-level executives if necessary, and even thought about the potential media coverage. Not for personal gain, but to encourage accountability. As the flight progressed, she noticed other passengers glancing at her occasionally. Some whispered quietly to each other, likely discussing the earlier incident. She didn't mind. She understood that her presence and actions could inspire others to stand up for themselves in moments of injustice. It wasn't about creating attention. It was about demonstrating how to handle unfair treatment with poise and effectiveness. She reviewed the potential outcomes in her mind. One option was a formal apology and immediate resolution for her situation, which she expected. Another was a deeper investigation into airline procedures and staff conduct, which she insisted upon. She thought about how she would document the progress, follow up on promised actions, and ensure that the resolution was not superficial. She believed in thoroughness, in making sure that systems improved rather than just offering quick fixes. During the flight, she also reflected on her personal philosophy. She believed in turning challenges into opportunities. An unfair denial of boarding could have been just an annoying inconvenience, but she saw it as a chance to create change. By addressing it professionally and strategically, she could make a lasting impact. She considered how she could share her experience with others, not to boast, but to provide a model of calm assertiveness in the face of injustice. The plane began its descent, and she prepared to land. She thought about the steps she would take once on the ground. She would continue the conversation with the airline, escalate if necessary, and ensure that the situation received the attention it deserved. She reminded herself that patience, persistence, and clarity were key. She did not need to rush. She needed to act deliberately. As the wheels touched the runway, she felt a quiet sense of anticipation. The flight itself had been uneventful, but the next phase of action was about to begin. She reviewed her notes one last time, mentally rehearsing how she would speak to airline executives, what points she would emphasize, and how she would maintain professionalism throughout. She knew that the way she handled the next few hours could determine whether the incident led to meaningful change or was forgotten. She disembarked with the same composed confidence she had shown throughout the flight. Airport staff watched her, some with curiosity, others with recognition. She walked with purpose, focused on her goal of accountability and fairness. She knew the journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Once she reached the area where she could speak with airline representatives in person, she was greeted formally. She explained the situation clearly, repeating the key details she had already documented. Her tone remained calm but firm. She emphasized the need for accountability, clear policies, and staff training to prevent similar incidents in the future. The representatives listened carefully, taking notes. They offered apologies and assurances that the matter would be reviewed thoroughly. She acknowledged their statements politely but reminded them that actions mattered more than words. She made it clear that she expected follow-up, and that she would remain in contact until the situation was resolved to her satisfaction. By the time she left the airport, she had already begun to feel a sense of progress. The initial shock and frustration had transformed into a structured plan for resolution. She had turned an upsetting experience into an opportunity to advocate for fairness and improvement. She knew that persistence, professionalism, and clear communication would be her strongest tools. As she left the terminal, she reflected on how this incident could impact not only her, but also other passengers who might face similar situations. She felt a quiet responsibility to use her influence wisely, ensuring that unfair treatment did not continue unchecked. She understood that leadership was not only about success in business, but also about standing up for justice, even in small, everyday moments. The airport faded behind her as she stepped into the city streets, ready to continue her journey. She carried with her a clear plan, a sense of purpose, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing she was prepared to handle whatever came next. This was more than just a flight. It was a moment that could lead to meaningful change, and she was determined to see it through. Once she arrived at her hotel, she didn't allow herself to rest immediately. The flight had been long, and most people might have wanted to sink into their room, take a shower, and forget the stressful airport experience. But she knew that this incident was far from over. Denying her boarding without a valid reason was not just inconvenient. It was a reflection of systemic issues that needed to be addressed. She needed to act, and she needed to act strategically. After settling her belongings briefly, she found a quiet corner in her suite and pulled out her phone. She didn't dial impulsively. Instead, she took a few moments to gather her thoughts, organize the facts, and plan the conversation she was about to have. She knew that every word would matter. This was not just about expressing frustration. It was about making sure the airline understood the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences if it wasn't handled properly. She began by drafting a clear summary of the incident. She listed the timeline, the staff involved, the words spoken, and the reactions of those around her. She noted the hesitation of the gate agent, the nervousness of the supervisor, and the lack of any real explanation. She included the fact that other passengers had witnessed the event, subtly noting that public perception could easily turn negative if this story was shared. She didn't exaggerate. She knew the power of facts, documented truth, and measured statements. Once she felt her notes were precise and complete, she made the call. She reached the airline's corporate office and asked to speak to someone in executive management. There was a brief pause on the other end, a moment of hesitation that suggested they were not used to receiving calls like hers. When a representative finally came on the line, she greeted them politely but firmly. "I would like to report a serious incident that happened at one of your gates earlier today," she began, keeping her tone calm. "It involves being denied boarding despite having a confirmed first-class ticket. I want to ensure this matter is reviewed thoroughly and resolved appropriately." The representative tried to reassure her quickly, offering apologies and standard responses, but she interrupted gently. "I appreciate that, but I need more than an apology. I need assurance that this will not happen again, that the policies will be reviewed, and that the staff involved understand the seriousness of their actions." She spoke clearly and confidently, emphasizing not only the personal inconvenience but also the reputational impact. "This was witnessed by other passengers," she continued. "You must understand that incidents like this can spread quickly and harm the airline's public image. I'm asking for proper accountability and steps to prevent future occurrences." As she spoke, she felt a sense of control. She wasn't being confrontational, but she wasn't passive either. Every word was deliberate. She outlined her expectations: acknowledgement of the mistake, investigation into why it happened, review of staff behavior, and updates on the actions being taken. She knew that vague promises would not suffice. Concrete steps were necessary, and she made that clear. The representative asked a few clarifying questions, and she answered them with calm precision. She described the interactions at the gate, the reactions of the staff, and the impact on her as a passenger. She highlighted that this was not an isolated issue of inconvenience, but a matter of fairness, equality, and professional treatment. She carefully articulated her points, making it obvious that she expected serious attention. Throughout the call, she maintained her composure. She didn't raise her voice, didn't express anger, and didn't resort to threats. She understood the power of calm authority. People respond differently to aggression than they do to clear, assertive communication. She wanted them to listen, understand, and act, not to react emotionally. As the conversation progressed, she emphasized her experience as a professional and her understanding of business consequences. She subtly reminded them that mishandling the situation could have repercussions beyond the immediate moment. This wasn't an idle warning. It was a measured statement of reality. Companies that ignored customer experiences like hers often faced backlash, and she made it clear that she expected the airline to handle this properly. The representative began to take the call more seriously. Their tone changed subtly, moving from routine customer service to genuine engagement. They asked more detailed questions about the staff involved, the exact sequence of events, and the witness statements. She provided clear answers, never speculating, always sticking to facts. She knew that facts built credibility. She also understood that her calm persistence would make it harder for them to dismiss the issue. After several minutes of detailed discussion, she outlined the follow-up she expected. She requested written confirmation that the incident would be investigated, updates on any actions taken, and an opportunity to review the findings. She also suggested that staff training and policy revisions be considered to prevent similar incidents in the future. She framed it not as punishment but as necessary improvement. The representative assured her that the matter would be escalated to senior management. They promised follow-up communication and indicated that they understood the seriousness of the issue. She thanked them for their attention but remained cautious. She knew that words were easy, actions were harder. She resolved to monitor the situation closely and ensure that the airline delivered on its promises. After ending the call, she leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to reflect. She had taken control of a situation that had initially left her feeling powerless. She had turned frustration into strategy and had used her influence responsibly. The satisfaction she felt was not personal triumph, but a sense of progress toward fairness and accountability. She opened her laptop and began drafting a detailed email to the airline, summarizing the call, the events, and her expectations. She made it formal but concise, clearly stating the facts, her observations, and the outcomes she expected. She knew that having a written record would ensure that her voice could not be ignored or misrepresented. Every detail mattered. The names, times, and descriptions of interactions were carefully noted. She paused for a moment, thinking about the broader implications. This incident, though seemingly small, reflected larger patterns. Airlines were responsible for ensuring that all passengers received fair treatment, regardless of background, status, or appearance. She considered how many others might have faced similar situations without the ability, confidence, or resources to address them effectively. That thought strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about her experience. It was about accountability for everyone. Her phone buzzed again. Another airline representative reached out, acknowledging the call and thanking her for bringing the matter to their attention. She responded politely, reiterating her expectations and emphasizing the importance of follow-up. She didn't rush. She knew that change took time, but that persistent, well-documented pressure often yielded results. As evening fell, she reflected on how she had handled the situation so far. She had remained calm, professional, and strategic. She had avoided anger, avoided confrontation, and focused instead on facts, clarity, and expectations. That approach had given her control, and she had leveraged it effectively. She realized that this was a demonstration of leadership, not just in business but in life. How to face challenges, stand up for oneself, and insist on fairness without losing dignity. She allowed herself a short break for dinner, but even then her mind remained partially on the incident. She reviewed her notes once again, ensuring that nothing was missed. She prepared mentally for possible scenarios, further delays in response, inadequate acknowledgement, or partial resolution. She considered how she would escalate if necessary, keeping her composure at all times. Later that night, she received an email from the airline's senior management. They acknowledged the seriousness of the incident, expressed regret for the treatment she had received, and assured her that a full review was underway. They promised updates and indicated that measures would be taken to prevent future occurrences. She read the message carefully, noting the tone, the specificity, and the commitments made. While it was not the final resolution, it was a positive step. She replied professionally, thanking them for their attention and requesting that all follow-up be documented. She emphasized that accountability was essential and that any systemic issues identified during the review should be addressed promptly. Her response was concise, polite, but firm. She understood that persistence and clarity were as important as the initial action. By the end of the night, she felt a sense of measured accomplishment. She had taken control of an unfair situation and had used strategy, professionalism, and persistence to ensure that it would be addressed. She had not allowed frustration to dictate her actions, and she had turned an uncomfortable experience into an opportunity for change. Before going to sleep, she reflected on the lessons of the day. Being denied boarding had been frustrating, even embarrassing at first, but it had also revealed her own strengths: patience, composure, clarity of thought, and ability to influence outcomes without aggression. She realized that sometimes challenges were not obstacles but opportunities to demonstrate character, leadership, and commitment to fairness. She set her alarm for the next morning, knowing that follow-up would be necessary. The journey was not yet over, and she was determined to see it through. But for the first time that day, she allowed herself a deep breath and a moment of calm. She had acted decisively, she had communicated clearly, and she had laid the foundation for real accountability. That was an achievement in itself. As she finally closed her laptop and leaned back, she felt a quiet sense of readiness. She knew that the airline would have to respond, that policies might be reviewed, and that the staff involved would have to face the consequences of their actions. But she also knew that she had handled the situation with integrity, and that her approach could serve as a model for others facing similar challenges. The day had begun with an unexpected denial of boarding, but it was ending with clarity, purpose, and momentum. She had turned frustration into strategy, and she knew that the story was far from over. She was prepared to continue advocating for fairness, using every tool at her disposal, and she was ready to see the impact of her actions unfold. The next morning, she woke up early as she always did, ready to take action. Overnight, she had reviewed her notes, the emails, and the details of the previous day. She understood that this was not just about one flight or one moment. It was about ensuring accountability and making sure that the airline took the situation seriously. She dressed professionally, as always, not out of vanity but because she believed that confidence and presentation mattered, especially when handling situations that required influence and authority. As she made her way to the airline's local office, she thought about the conversation she had had the day before. The representatives had promised follow-up, but promises alone were not enough. She knew that to create real change, she needed to be present, persistent, and precise. She wasn't there to intimidate anyone. She was there to insist that fairness and professionalism mattered. She had learned long ago that presence alone often shifted dynamics, making people take responsibility more seriously. When she arrived at the office, she was greeted politely by the receptionist, who quickly called for the senior representative she had spoken with on the phone. She waited calmly, reviewing her mental notes and thinking through the points she would make. Every word mattered, and she wanted to be clear, firm, and measured. She understood that escalation required strategy, not emotion. The senior representative, a middle-aged woman with a professional demeanor, arrived and invited her into a conference room. The atmosphere was formal but not tense, and she appreciated that. She began by recounting the incident step by step, providing a clear, factual description. She emphasized how she had been denied boarding without explanation, how the staff had reacted nervously, and how other passengers had witnessed the situation. She spoke without anger but with authority. Her tone was calm, deliberate, and commanding respect without raising her voice. The representative listened carefully, occasionally taking notes. She asked questions and she answered them directly, without speculation or exaggeration. She explained that the denial of boarding had caused inconvenience, frustration, and embarrassment. More importantly, she highlighted the broader implications. A failure to treat passengers fairly could harm the airline's reputation, erode trust, and expose the company to public scrutiny. As the conversation progressed, she shifted to solutions. She wasn't there merely to complain. She was there to insist on meaningful action. She outlined the steps she believed were necessary: acknowledgement of the mistake, investigation into staff conduct, training to prevent similar incidents, and public communication where appropriate. She emphasized that the goal was not punishment but accountability and improvement. The representative nodded, clearly impressed by the clarity and thoroughness of her presentation. She could feel the weight of her words, the combination of authority and reason that demanded attention. It wasn't aggression that commanded respect. It was the calm confidence and insistence on proper procedures. She continued, explaining that policies should be reviewed to ensure that no passenger, regardless of background or status, faced similar treatment in the future. As the discussion continued, she shared her perspective on leadership and influence. She explained that those in positions of authority often had the power to shape systems and standards. By addressing incidents like hers thoughtfully and strategically, she could help ensure that the airline's policies reflected fairness and professionalism. She wasn't seeking personal gain. She was advocating for systemic improvement that would benefit everyone. The representative responded positively, acknowledging the points she made. She assured her that a full review would take place, that the staff involved would be held accountable, and that procedures would be adjusted where necessary. She promised regular updates on the investigation and invited her to provide input as the review progressed. This was exactly the outcome she had aimed for: constructive, actionable, and systemic. After the meeting, she left the office with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had achieved what she set out to do. She had turned a frustrating and unfair situation into an opportunity for change. She had done so not through anger or confrontation, but through calm authority, careful documentation, and strategic communication. She understood that this approach not only resolved her own issue, but also created a path for others who might face similar challenges. As she walked through the city streets, she reflected on the incident. She thought about the gate agent, the supervisor, and the passengers who had witnessed everything. She didn't feel animosity toward the individuals involved. They had likely acted out of habit, training, or unexamined biases. Her focus was on the system, on ensuring that rules, policies, and standards prevented future mistreatment. She believed in accountability, not blame. By the afternoon, she received a follow-up email from the airline. The message confirmed that the investigation was underway and that senior management had reviewed the incident. The email outlined immediate actions. The staff involved would receive retraining. Policies would be reviewed to prevent similar occurrences, and updates would be provided on the results of the review. She read the email carefully, appreciating the specificity and the commitment to action. While it wasn't the final resolution, it was a clear step forward. She replied politely, acknowledging the measures being taken and reiterating her expectation for thorough follow-up. She emphasized the importance of ensuring that systemic issues were addressed and that passengers' rights were respected consistently. Her response was professional, firm, and concise, reinforcing her position without aggression. As the day progressed, she noticed subtle changes in how airline staff interacted with her and others. When she called for assistance or asked questions, responses were prompt, polite, and attentive. It was a small detail, but it reflected the power of accountability and the ripple effect of addressing issues effectively. She recognized that change often begins with a single action and grows through consistency and persistence. In the evening, she took a moment to reflect on what she had accomplished. She hadn't just resolved her own inconvenience. She had initiated a process that could improve experiences for countless passengers. By staying calm, measured, and strategic, she had influenced the airline's approach and policies. She understood that leadership was not limited to business meetings or boardrooms. It extended to everyday situations where fairness and integrity were at stake. She also considered the broader lesson. Moments of challenge, even when frustrating or unfair, could become opportunities to demonstrate character, influence outcomes, and create meaningful change. She had handled this incident not with anger or confrontation, but with patience, clarity, and strategic action. That approach had allowed her to remain in control and achieve results that were significant, lasting, and positive. As night fell, she reflected on the responses she had received from both the airline and her own team. She had made sure to keep colleagues informed not for approval, but to ensure transparency and shared understanding. They admired her calm handling of the situation, noting that it demonstrated the same leadership qualities she applied in business. It was a reminder that integrity, poise, and strategic thinking mattered in all areas of life. Before going to bed, she reviewed her notes once again, ensuring that every detail of the incident, the responses, and the actions taken was documented. She knew that careful documentation was key to accountability. She understood that change didn't happen overnight, but persistence, clarity, and professionalism often produced the most enduring results. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The airline was taking action. Policies were being reviewed, and the staff involved were being held accountable. More importantly, the situation had become an example of how fair, strategic, and professional action could create meaningful change. She had transformed frustration into opportunity, embarrassment into influence, and a personal inconvenience into systemic improvement. As she prepared for the next day, she felt confident and ready. She knew that follow-up would be necessary, but she also knew that she had set the stage for accountability and fairness. She had shown that calm persistence, clear communication, and strategic action could resolve even difficult, frustrating situations. The incident at the airport, which had begun as an unfair denial of boarding, had become a moment of leadership, influence, and positive change. She thought about the passengers who had witnessed the original incident and how their perception of fairness had been affected. By addressing the issue effectively, she had not only restored her own rights but also demonstrated to others the importance of standing up for what is right. With composure and clarity, she realized that leadership often shows itself in moments like these, outside of meetings, contracts, or presentations, in moments where fairness and integrity are tested. By the end of the day, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had navigated a complex situation with professionalism, had ensured that accountability was underway, and had influenced systemic change. She had done all of this without confrontation or aggression, relying instead on strategic thinking, documentation, and clear communication. The incident was no longer just a story of frustration. It had become a story of influence, leadership, and fairness in action. The next morning, she woke up with a clear sense of purpose. The past few days had been a mix of frustration, strategy, and persistence. The incident at the airport had been resolved in terms of immediate action, but she knew the story wasn't over yet. Real change required follow-through. She wanted to ensure that accountability was real, that the airline implemented meaningful improvements, and that her experience served as a lesson for the future. She started her day by reviewing the updates the airline had sent overnight. The message confirmed that the staff involved had been spoken to and retraining was underway. Policies were being reviewed and measures were being put in place to prevent future occurrences. She read the email carefully, noting the specific steps mentioned. It was clear that the airline was taking the situation seriously, but she also knew that words on a screen were only the first step. True change required sustained attention. After breakfast, she decided to visit the airline's office once more. This time, she was not there just to present her case, but to witness the progress firsthand. She wanted to see the people responsible for the investigation and to understand how seriously the policies were being revised. She believed that action taken in view of accountability often had a stronger impact. It was one thing to promise change. It was another to demonstrate it through concrete steps. When she arrived, she was greeted with a mixture of professionalism and visible respect. The staff seemed aware that she had handled the situation with remarkable composure and clarity. They invited her into a meeting room where the airline executives were waiting. She walked in confidently, her posture calm but authoritative. She greeted everyone politely and began the discussion immediately, focusing on outcomes and progress. She asked about the staff retraining programs, the review of boarding procedures, and how the airline intended to ensure fairness across all flights. The executives responded with detailed explanations. They described new training modules, revisions to customer handling policies, and measures to monitor compliance. They emphasized that this incident had highlighted weaknesses they had not fully recognized before, and they acknowledged her role in bringing them to light. She listened carefully, asking clarifying questions and taking notes. She was thorough, not to challenge them unnecessarily, but to ensure that the changes were meaningful and practical. She wanted the policies to be robust enough that no passenger would face similar treatment, regardless of circumstances. Her approach was thoughtful, focused on systemic improvement rather than individual blame. During the meeting, she shared her perspective on leadership and influence. She explained that true leadership often shows itself in moments of fairness and accountability. It isn't always about making decisions in boardrooms or overseeing large projects. Sometimes it's about ensuring that everyday processes treat people with respect and integrity. She emphasized that addressing even small injustices could prevent larger issues and reinforce a culture of fairness. The executives nodded, clearly taking her words seriously. They acknowledged that the incident had been mishandled and that their staff needed better guidance. They committed to implementing the changes she had suggested and to monitoring the results closely. She felt a quiet satisfaction. This was exactly the outcome she had envisioned: accountability, systemic improvement, and awareness of the importance of fair treatment. After the meeting, she walked through the office, observing the environment. Staff were busy at work, but she could sense a new level of attentiveness and care. There was a subtle shift in how people interacted, a reflection of the attention the incident had received. She realized that change often begins quietly, in small adjustments that accumulate over time. By addressing the situation calmly and strategically, she had helped initiate that shift. Later that day, she received a call from the airline's public relations department. They wanted to discuss how the incident had been handled and how to communicate improvements to the public. She agreed to speak with them, understanding that transparency was an essential part of accountability. During the conversation, she provided clear guidance on the importance of acknowledging the mistake without creating unnecessary controversy. She stressed that the message should focus on fairness, improvement, and commitment to customer respect. The PR team listened attentively and promised to craft a statement reflecting the changes and lessons learned. She emphasized that the story should highlight the airline's commitment to doing better, rather than sensationalizing the incident. She wanted to ensure that future passengers would see the airline as responsible and trustworthy. and that the focus remained on fairness rather than individual drama. Throughout the day, she reflected on how this experience had unfolded. What began as an upsetting denial of boarding had become a series of strategic actions that led to meaningful change. She had remained composed, documented every detail, and communicated clearly and effectively. Her calm persistence had made the airline recognize not just her personal rights, but the importance of treating all passengers fairly. She also thought about the passengers who had witnessed the initial incident. Many of them had likely experienced frustration or discomfort at seeing someone treated unfairly. By addressing the issue decisively, she had restored not only her own dignity but also reinforced a sense of fairness for everyone who had watched. The ripple effect of her actions extended beyond the immediate moment, creating a model for how to handle injustice calmly and effectively. In the evening, she took a moment to relax. She reviewed her notes, the emails, and the conversations she had had with the airline. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from personal triumph, but from the knowledge that her actions had led to concrete improvements. The staff involved had received retraining, policies were being updated, and the airline was committed to ensuring fairness. What could have been a humiliating or discouraging experience had become an opportunity for positive impact. She thought about how often people might face similar challenges but feel powerless to act. She realized that confidence, preparation, and clarity of communication were essential tools in creating change. By documenting facts, remaining composed, and insisting on accountability, she had demonstrated a method for addressing unfair treatment that could be applied in many situations, not just at airports. Her phone buzzed again with an email from the airline's senior management. They thanked her for her patience, acknowledged the effectiveness of her guidance, and confirmed that systemic changes were being implemented. They promised ongoing updates and invited her to provide feedback once the improvements were fully in place. She read the message carefully and responded politely, reiterating her appreciation and emphasizing the importance of continued accountability. As night fell, she reflected on the journey. The denial of boarding had been unexpected, frustrating, and uncomfortable. Yet, through patience, strategy, and professionalism, she had transformed the experience into a series of meaningful outcomes. She had influenced the airline's approach, reinforced the importance of fairness, and ensured that future passengers would benefit from improved policies. She realized that leadership and influence were not only about grand gestures or high-profile achievements. They were also about how one handled everyday challenges, how one responded to injustice, and how one ensured that systems worked fairly for everyone. By remaining calm, documenting everything, and communicating clearly, she had achieved lasting impact without aggression or confrontation. The next morning, she reflected on how the airline had publicly acknowledged the incident and the steps being taken to prevent similar occurrences. She read news reports and social media posts discussing the situation, noting how her calm, professional approach had been highlighted as an example of effective advocacy. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that the story would inspire others to act with integrity and persistence when facing unfair treatment.